4 years ago, she disappeared without a sound, swallowed by the endless wild, leaving behind only fading paw prints and the ache of unfinished memory. He searched until his voice broke, until hope became a dull echo buried beneath seasons of silence. But some bonds do not vanish. They sink deeper, entwining themselves with the marrow of your bones. And tonight, as the sky bleeds with smoke and fire, somewhere in the scorched remains of a dying forest, a white wolf curls her broken body around 3 trembling lives, eyes half-closed, breath shallow and still, without knowing why. A man miles away wakes gasping into the dark, feeling the air shift the way it used to when she was near, because some connections defy time. Some grief never stops calling, and sometimes what we lose doesn't die. It waits, each morning. Elias rose before the sun, the cabin still wrapped in shadow and cold, the same way it had been for years, only now quieter, thinner, as if something essential had slipped out while he slept. He brewed his coffee in silence, the old tin kettle whistling like a distant voice, and sat on the porch, wrapped in the same worn coat, always facing the tree line, eyes tracing the place where snow used to gather at her paws. He never called her name, not anymore. But sometimes his lips moved without sound, as if rehearsing a conversation that would never come. The forest was calm, the world unchanged, and yet the bowl by the door remained the spot by the fireplace, untouched, the gate to the trail, never, latched completely open, just enough out of habit or denial. The radio crackled, weather reports, bird calls, but he listened for something else, a sound he could never explain. And in the evenings when the wind shifted, he'd sit with his journal open, but blank, not ready to write, not willing to forget. And when sleep came, it came lightly, full of pause in snow and a flash of white fur, always just ahead, always just out of reach. The day she vanished, the world did not roar or crumble. It simply shifted. The sun rose the same but colder somehow. The trees stood still but watching, and the silence that followed was not quiet. It was total. A severing of breath from body, of meaning from movement. Elias ran, at first his feet breaking through brush and snow, his throat raw from calling her name again and again, as if sound alone could undo what had happened. The place where she always waited was bare. No paw prints, no sign, no struggle, just a stillness too sharp to belong in nature, and something inside him cracked, not loudly, not all at once, but slowly. Like ice underfoot, he searched every day, bruised ribs, torn sleeves, maps stained with sweat and rain and disbelief. He showed photos to strangers, described her eyes like someone describing a missing child. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew something had gone wrong, something final. And after enough days passed, the urgency dissolved into something quieter, something worse. He stopped telling people what he was looking for, stopped expecting her to return. He walked the trails in silence, sometimes stopping in the same places. She used to pause as if she might be waiting just around the bend, but she never was, and the seasons turned without her. He still filled her bowl without thinking, still looked to the edge of the trees at dusk, still listened for the weightless sound of her paws approaching. But nothing came, and over time the world didn't heal. It just dulled the way light does when filtered through grief. He laughed, less, spoke, less, kept to the cabin, more as if every word he gave the world was one it didn't deserve, and the silence between them stretched long and quiet, like a field buried in snow. No footsteps, no direction, just the ache of something, once whole, now gone and unfinished. Let me pause here for a moment and turn to you. Where are you listening from right now? Have you ever experienced something like this? Someone, maybe a person or even an animal, remembering you after years apart? That quiet shock of recognition, that feeling that some bonds don't fade, even with time. If stories like this speak to you, if they stir something soft and silent inside, go ahead and subscribe. There's more to come. Stories of love that endures, of loss that teaches, of returns you never saw coming. It started with a photograph flickering on a news report, half watched in the background, a scorched forest skyline glowing red with smoke, and at its center, a blur of white fur curled tight around something small. It lasted only seconds, but something in his chest snapped awake. Not memory exactly, more like recognition without proof. He paused. The screen leaned in closer, heart pounding like it had no reason, and yet every reason at once. Later, the call came. A ranger calm but cautious saying they'd found a wolf alive against the odds, badly burned guarding cubs, and wearing an old metal tag nearly melted. W17. Elias sat down hard, the number echoing louder than any name his mind tried to push it away. Logic throwing weight against the impossible. But beneath it, something older moved, something soft and electric. A voice he hadn't heard in years, whispering through the cracks. He didn't remember grabbing his coat or checking the weather. Just the feel of keys in his hand and the way his fingers trembled as he zipped the old travel bag. Part of him screamed, this could be a mistake, a cruel trick of coincidence. But another part, a deeper, quieter part, whispered, what if? And that was all it took. The drive was long, the sky growing darker, the smoke a rising bruise along the edge of the world. With every mile his doubt grew heavier. But so did something else, something like breath returning to lungs that hadn't dared to fill fully in years. He tried to steel himself, told himself she wouldn't remember, that wolves forget, that too much time had passed, and he was no longer the man she knew. But none of that stopped him, because hope is never rational. It just is. Even if it hurts, even if it ends, he had to know, had to see, and maybe in that burned and broken place, there was something still alive, not just in the ashes, but in him too. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and smoke, the kind of sharp air that clings to memory. Elias moved without speaking. Each step pulled more by instinct than will, and, when the door opened, time thinned into a single breath. She was there, smaller than he remembered. Her fur streaked black with soot, her frame barely holding itself up, but her shape, her stillness, her silence. He would have known her anywhere she lay, protectively around her cubs, body curled like a shield, breathing, shallow eyes half closed. And then she turned her head just slightly, and their eyes met. He froze. He didn't speak, not yet afraid the sound might break, whatever this was. Her eyes blinked, slow, uncertain, as if looking through fog and across time. And then she stared deeper, not at him, but into him. Something old flickered there, not fear, not pain, something quieter, a recognition, not loud but absolute. His throat closed around her name, but he said it anyway. Ghost, just once, soft like a promise. And her ears twitched. Her eyes didn't leave his, and then she moved barely at first. Her body trembling from the effort, her paws dragged slightly in the bedding, but she leaned forward toward the wire, and that was all it took. Elias dropped to his knees, fingers curling through the fence, his hand outstretched, not forcing, not calling, just waiting. And she reached him. Her muzzle touched his skin, and for a long moment neither of them moved. No sound. No. Rush. Just breath and memory and weight, returning to the space between them. He felt it like a tide, something unspoken and unbroken. Even now, even after fire and years and silence. Her cubs shifted close but quiet, sensing something sacred passing between. The two and Elias felt the world tilt back into place. Not the way it was, but the way it could be. Her eyes fluttered closed, as if finally letting go of everything she had held just to survive. And for the first time in years, he exhaled fully, not in grief, not in fear, but in the gravity of coming home. Mornings came slow and golden, the kind that warmed instead of burned, and with them came the smallest changes. Ghost began to lift her head before the keepers arrived, her ears flicking at familiar footsteps, her body still thin, still healing but steadier. The cubs, bold and clumsy, tumbled through the straw chasing leaves and light, while she watched with the calm of something that had fought too long to waste anything. Now Elias came early stayed, late never spoke too much, just sat near enough for her to feel him. And over time her eyes softened when he entered. Not wide, not startled, just present. He would reach through the fence, palm up, and she'd meet it with her nose the way she used to when days were simpler and their world had no cracks. Once she limped to the edge of the enclosure while he read aloud something about wind and winter, and paused only when her paw pressed lightly to the mesh, not clawing, not demanding, just resting, and he closed the book, gently leaned forward and let the silence say everything it needed. Some afternoons he'd find a feather or a bone left at the front of her pen, as if she remembered what offerings once meant, and he'd smile small and private and leave a pine branch in return. The cubs grew strong, wild, curious, but never strayed too far, and Ghost began to sleep more deeply. Her breath slow and even like trust, slowly returning to her ribs, and for Elias, something inside softened, not all at once, but steadily. The ache that had shaped his days like a shadow eased. Not because the past had changed, but because the present held her again. Not as she was, but as she still chose to be. And one evening, as the sky blushed and the trees whispered old names, he sat beside her pen hand to wire. She pressed her head to his. And they stayed like that for a long, long time. No need to speak. No need to explain, because in the quiet between them lived every moment they had ever shared, and everyone they would still find. And in that quiet, the truth lingered. Love that endures does not return the same, it returns deeper, wiser, quieter, and more alive than ever. Some bonds ask for nothing, no words, no promises, just presence. They slip beneath time, through silence, through all the years where nothing was said, but everything was felt. She never needed to explain where she had gone. He never asked, because what mattered was not what was lost, it was what endured. In the end, she came back not as a memory, but as proof. That real connection doesn't vanish. It stays quiet. It waits. And when the moment is right, it returns not to remind you of the pain, but to remind you of who you were before it. And who you still are now.